and a type 2. Oh, that's weird. There's type 1 and type 2. This is from the previous set of regulations. And each of them have an aura, but the performance standards are different. So the type 1, which has more flow, more for longer periods of time than a type 2, would have the performance standards that are spelled out in the Wetlands Protection Act riverfront area performance standards for the inner 100 feet, or the inner riparian zone it's called. And the type 2, which is a more intermittent stream, it doesn't have as much continuous flow time, would have a lower standard of protection. But they would both have 100-foot buffer zone as defined by the methodology that has already been approved by the commission here in 7.225. And again, this is all pretty much the same language from the previous regs. And the riverfront area, so this is a new section because riverfront area was not a protected resource under the previous bylaw. So we didn't talk about riverfront area at all in the regs last time around because we couldn't. But that 200-foot zone is already protected by state law, and the state law regs are pretty good because those regs were adopted most recently. They're newer than some of the regs for other resource areas, and they're quite detailed. So this is just really kind of bringing these regulations into alignment with the state regs for riverfront area. Here is some just preamble information. I'm not going to kind of get into all that. And then here's a definition of riverfront area, and the definition is based on the distance horizontally from the mean annual high water line of a perennial stream, only a perennial stream, not intermittent streams. There's no riverfront area for intermittent streams. And some information about how the mean annual high water line is defined. And the characteristics of riverfront area, and it just basically referencing the state regs here. And the presumptions, again, and the performance standards. No activity or work other than the maintenance of an already existing structure, which will result in the building within upon removing, filling, or altering a riverfront area should be permitted except upon a clear showing by preponderance of credible evidence that the values are not going to be harmed. So it doesn't mean that you can't alter riverfront area, but you have to have this credible evidence showing that there's not going to be an overall adverse effect. And in state law, there's a requirement for an alternatives analysis, and our bylaw also requires an alternatives analysis. So this spells out this process. An alternatives analysis is basically kind of an analytical tool where an applicant demonstrates that they've looked at other options, and the option they're proposing is the only practicable one. And practicable is defined as being kind of reasonable and capable of being done in terms of what is available on the land, what is the project's purpose, how much is it going to cost, what kind of technology is required, overall project costs. That, you know, if something was prohibitively expensive, then it wouldn't be a practicable alternative. And again, there's this piece about alteration and wildlife habitat evaluations, which is required under state law, and it's included in these regs. All right. And then down here under vegetation, this is a little different. So the vegetation removal and replacement performance standards that we adopted with our regulations had a table for replacing trees. And the table was based on the number of trees being removed and the size of the trees. So the more mature trees, which have more benefit to the environment and to resource areas, would require more replacement saplings. So if you were cutting down a really mature tree, you might have to have, several, or two or more saplings. I don't have the table in front of me. So that's kind of thinking that, the priority is to preserve overall amount of vegetation and to compensate or mitigate for removing mature trees. In looking at other communities, a lot of communities have tables of this sort, and everybody does it a little bit differently. But it seemed to me that another way to go that was a little simpler was to tie the replacement to where on the landscape the tree removal was taking place. Again, prioritizing the revegetation or maintaining vegetation within that 50-foot aura or the inner riverfront area, because that's being prioritized as being an area to protect, and not having the same concern for areas outside of that, where presumably the environmental impact of the tree removal would be less. So I'm just suggesting this as a simpler way to do this. And also, as you'll look, this ratio for replacement is less onerous. As you can see, within the outer 50-foot, it's just a 1-to-1 tree replacement, or four shrubs for one tree. And then it's a different ratio for the inner 50-foot. And then there's a definition of which trees would be subsequent subject to replacement. So at its discretion, the commission may grant a waiver to this requirement. However, the following replacements shall be required in order to obtain a, actually, this should probably go up above because it says following. All right, sorry about that. You might want to check that. In order to obtain a waiver, so people would have to go through this process, and the location of the trees be verified by the commission, and have there would also be the opportunity to modify the replacement quantities and types if the commission made a finding that it was there was going to be an undue hardship, or that the trees being removed aren't going to really have a value or an impact on the values. So if there's some trees being removed that are kind of right by the road, and or in the right of way, and aren't really very close to the wetland, maybe the commission might say those are not as important as ones that are providing shade and habitat, wildlife habitat for resource areas close to them. Okay. So that's, again, something that the commission can consider. I think, it's worth looking at what are you actually requiring, and what do you think is really feasible for people and fair and affordable, as well as, it doesn't help to kind of have a formula that's too complex and that the commission just isn't going to use. You should try to come up with something, I think, that is usable and practical. All right. So I believe that is all there is. Oh, and then we've got procedures and permits. We're almost done, actually. I don't see any changes here. Abutter notifications, a little bit of difference here in the new bylaw about the wording of an abutter notification. It is not necessary now for people to send a copy of the plan to applicants, which we weren't requiring people to do anyway, but it wasn't really practical to do that. The notification to abutters can also now be done by USPS certificates of mailing, which is approved under the bylaw and is much less expensive for applicants. There's significant savings of maybe hundreds of dollars, depending on how many abutters you have, by going that route. So that's a good thing that the bylaw has that. This is just some information about abbreviated notices of resource area delineation, or ANRADs. Basically applicants must provide information on the NRED form and must fulfill the filing requirements. The submittal of a complete and accurate description of the site and project will minimize requests for additional information, which could result in delays. And the commission may also require supporting materials be prepared by other professionals, including but not limited to, and then there's a list of people. The reason why there's might be other parties is that, for example, if there's an intermittent stream, the commission might want to have a hydrologist or other kind of environmental scientist weigh in about the delineation of the intermittent stream and where it begins and ends. So the commission could require that. Anyway, this is just letting people know that the commission could do that. The next section, small project permit. This is basically the same language that's in the bylaw or was in the previous set of regulations under administrative approvals. Whereas you may recall, we weren't allowed to call this permit process a permit under the previous bylaw, so we just called it administrative approvals, which we're allowed to do. Commission is allowed to issue administrative desk decisions or letters to people. But anyway, so this is just basically the same language from the bylaw. And these are the criteria that the commission had used under the previous regs. And the requirements for a permit and the process for approval. And, there is the commission can approve or deny a permit by majority vote. If the commission decided that something didn't really qualify as a small project permit, it would deny the permit, and then the applicant would have to, if they wanted to go forward, would have to probably apply for a different kind of permit, depending on the circumstances, what permit that would be. RDAs, again, this is just the certificates of mailing thing. Nothing's changed. NOIs, nothing is changed in here. Public hearings, there's a little bit of different language about public hearings in the bylaw. So this is taking some of that information about a commission having the authority to continue a public hearing. And if an applicant did not agree to that continuation, then the hearing would close and the commission would take whatever action it deemed it could on the information available, and it could mean that they deny a permit if they didn't feel like they had enough information. And then the legal notice, excuse me, is at the applicant's expense, but that the commission will arrange the notice publication as is current practice. Coordination with other boards, this is just updating the language to mirror what is in the bylaw. And decisions, this is again language that is mirroring the bylaw. And reasons why a permit could be denied. Again, this is in the bylaw. And no work can commence with a permit or an ORAD unless it's been recorded in the Franklin County Register of Deeds. And that the commission will send a copy of the permit decision to the applicant. Under security, this is just revised language that was in the bylaw. So this is again taking the exact language that was in the bylaw. Extension of permit. Okay, this is all the same. We're almost done. Project changes. Okay, enforcement. So this is language taken from the new bylaw under enforcement. And it is all the same. The 21D provisions are here. So just updating that section. And Janice and I, this last section, 17.85, it was the language that was in here was taken from some regulations from some other communities, and it was a little vague what it meant. It said something like failure to comply with any certification on previously approved plans. And it wasn't really clear what that means. So we just added this extra language here, or to seek failure or failure to seek approval from the commission for any modifications to plans prior to the commencement of any unapproved work, meaning that, you know, if you're in the middle of a permit and you're starting your work, and all of a sudden you realize you need to change your plan, but that change hasn't been approved, that could be a potential violation if you don't come back to the commission and inform them of the need to change the plan and to get their approval in whatever form that approval needs to take. Under enforcement order, Janice suggested that in situations requiring immediate action, the order could be signed by the commission chair if unavailable, or if unavailable, another commissioner, because that's sort of standard practice rather than what I think the previous draft had said, which was an agent.
It also said or a member, and it's just usually, that's not usually the way conservation commissions do it. Usually it's the chair that has that responsibility to make the decision to issue an enforcement order, and you don't leave it up to a member. They may not be in sync with the rest of the commission. The chair tries to make sure he or she follows what the commission would want, and then it gets ratified at the next meeting. So it just seemed too broad to just say any of the members could issue an enforcement order. So I thought that the standard is for the commission chair to do it, and if they're not available, then another commissioner can.
And that kind of mirrors what happens with emergency projects, that if there's an emergency project, the chair can issue an emergency certification that then gets ratified at the next meeting. Right?
Yes.
Yep. All right, I think that is all there is. I'm just looking, I don't think there were any other changes here. Under emergency projects, you have to say who's doing the work, and it's an example contractor or homeowner, but in reality, usually it's a public agency. So Janice suggested putting the word public agency in there because it could be any of the above that's doing the work for an emergency project. But usually ends up being, most emergency projects are brought by, you know, public safety or the highway department or fire department or something like that. And that's it, I think. Let me look. I don't think there was any other changes. Nothing. Oh, this was under the required narrative. This was Janice, you had suggested that they include, that was just a wording change, methods to be used for control.
Yep.
Control of erosion sedimentation during and after construction. Where such methods are necessary. There could be situations where it doesn't make sense to use any erosion controls because there's not really a risk of runoff. And I don't think, okay, site visits. So this is another small wording change. It said, you know, that under non-urgent conditions, the commission shall give the applicant or the representative advance notice of the site visit. Refusal to permit timely site inspections under an application or permit may result in enforcement action or permit denial. And so before it just said enforcement action, but adding also permit denial. And then the fee schedules are as they were with the changes that the commission had approved earlier this year. And then the other thing, this is all moving on here. So the Appendix A had the 5 categories for calculating the fees for notices of intent. And those 5 categories are based on the definitions of the categories from the Wetlands Protection Act. But it wasn't clear that that's where you would go to look for definitions of those categories. And the categories were kind of abbreviated. And Janice and I were concerned that an applicant might get confused because it didn't use the exact same language that are in the state regs. So we're suggesting just revising Appendix A in this way with the exact language from 310 CMR 10.037C, which is where they have all the categories for the fees. And you can have an abbreviation in your instructions for applicants, but the regulations is kind of the go-to, and the commission would rely on this to decide whether or not an appropriate fee had been calculated. Because there could be a situation where maybe somebody counted wrong and didn't fill out the worksheet and either is paying too much or too little. So that's what this is. And we took out and omitted the items that had to do with coastal projects because obviously that isn't relevant for Shutesbury. And then the second recommendation for appendices was to add abbreviations. And so Janice put this together of all of the abbreviations that are in the regulations. They're already defined in the text of the regulations, but this could be a kind of a go-to for people to refer to if they find that the terms they can't find where the acronyms are spelled out. Okay.
Great.
We powered through it.
You did. You powered through it. That was great. That was a good summary. And I guess I speak for everybody to say thank you so much to both of you for going through and making all of those updates and changes, proposed updates and changes. That was a lot of work. So we definitely 100% appreciate all of that. I have some questions and things that maybe we can talk about. Maybe I'll start with one and then other commissioners can ask theirs.
Do you want that document up? So should I put it back up?
Sure.
Okay. And I'll just scroll and you can, I think this is it. Okay.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to just kind of talk about, because it's a little confusing, is in the definition section, you went through the intermittent stream definition. And that has to do with, the streams that go underground. But when I think of an intermittent stream, I think of intermittent versus perennial. And it's almost like in the definition, we're saying an intermittent stream, meaning one that, tends to go underground for, the 200-foot. It's an intermittent stream that's an intermittent stream. And I'm wondering if I'm just wondering if other people think that is we should probably come up with a different term than intermittent stream for the streams that go underground.
Yeah, I know I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So maybe.
And it is defined in the performance under inland resource areas. There is kind of and this is true, sometimes you'll have a definition under definitions and then it'll be amplified in that section for inland resource areas. So I think that it's already defined. You could possibly just incorporate this in those definitions and take this out because it's, still defined as long as it's defined under resource areas. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess
because it is defined as, an intermittent stream as being one that I think it's even defined as under state law, an intermittent stream is a stream that has a watershed that's under a certain threshold.
Right.
So that's not defined in terms of how much flow there is, or how long it flows during the year. It's what the size of the watershed is.
Right. That's why I'm thinking this type of stream where we're saying it's the entirety of the subsurface or subterranean portion of a naturally occurred. These are the streams where our new kind of streams that we want to protect, ones that go underground for a portion.
Yeah,
and then come back up.
I think you're absolutely right. I think
I
that
think we still want to include them. We just need a different name for them than intermittent stream because obviously, like you're saying, under the state and everybody else thinks of an intermittent stream as the state regulations define it.
I think that there's two things going on here. One is I think that we should have a definition of intermittent stream that is consistent with how everybody else is thinking about intermittent streams. So I think this needs to be fixed. But I think that this is a characteristic of an intermittent stream, which is that it loses surface connectivity, but may have flow. So that even during periods of, because that was the whole thing that Patrick Garner had said, that even periods of an intermittent stream may dry up during a dry period, but even during periods of high flow, like in spring, an intermittent stream may disappear. It may go subsurface. And then how do you figure out what to protect, what land area to protect? So that's what this language was about that 200 feet. But I think that that's really belongs probably under critical characteristics or defining characteristics.
Yeah.
I see what you mean, Beth, and I agree. Usually you say intermittent stream and you're thinking of a stream that just flows along the surface and occasionally dries up in patches or whatever, versus one that's actually going underground, losing the surface connectivity, as it says there, and then comes back up. So I think it would be good to somehow be able to have that slightly different so that we don't lose that connectivity, underground connectivity thing that we had to deal with Pat Garner and do so much work on.
Right, because that's a definition that addresses a different issue. I mean, like there's an intermittent stream, which is like a stream that's clearly has a characteristics of a stream, but it's not perennial, right? It doesn't have the watershed size, so it doesn't meet the criteria for perennial. However, this is addressing a different issue, which is that, when you have lengths of this intermittent stream that have no stream bed characteristic, you can't, there's a stream bed for a while and there's bank, but then the bank disappears for a while, where does the jurisdiction start and stop?
Yeah, and I mean, I know, and it's talked about in another section. So in the end, maybe we just don't have this definition in the definition section, because I think that's where it gets confusing to me, is that you're actually defining the term intermittent stream differently than like in the riverfront section where you're talking about the difference between perennial and intermittent streams in that standard way. So I'm wondering if anyway, I think something that we need to the commission needs to just kind of figure out how we want to distinguish within the regulations those two different things.
I agree. I absolutely agree with you.
Okay.
I'll take a look at it, and if I can email the commission if I have some thoughts about it afterwards. But it was a good catch.
Yeah. And I don't want to hog all the time. We could do, one question at a time. Do other commissioners have some questions? Comments? No?
Beth?
Do you want to take it? Would it be helpful to kind of go back through kind of section by section, Beth, or I'm just wondering if we would be jumping around quite a bit.
Sure, we can start from the beginning if people want to do that.
It's a very good place to start.
Yep, so I had no questions with I guess, most of Article 1. Let's see. Right, yeah, scroll. Scroll down that jurisdiction that didn't have any questions on those changes. I did have questions about these general presumptions, and I think it comes from, I see repetition with what's in these general presumptions and then what's in
The
the
bylaw.
back end. Well, the back end of the document where you're talking about, for example, like there's the aura section, the aura resource section in the back of the regulations that has its own presumptions, and there's just a lot of repetition, I find, and that's just my comment on it. I guess it's not really a question. It's just something that I think as we kind of try to finalize these regulations, because this section has grew a lot from
Well, yeah, well, let me just explain where this comes from. So this is from the MACC model bylaw. So we didn't write it. I think Mr. McGregor wrote it or somebody at MACC did.
Yeah.
And so it's in the bylaw. And so I just copy and pasted from the bylaw. It doesn't need to be in the regulations because it's in the bylaw, right? The regulations expand, but it's sort of like, I felt like to not have it in leaves a big piece out. I mean, you could just reference the bylaw, say general presumptions shall be as so stated in, section blah, blah, blah of the bylaw, and then you don't have to restate it because it's already
Right.
in there. And if that's more concise and makes sense to the commission, that one way to do it. What I had a hard time with this, the reason why I put this under this whole section is that each of these paragraphs kind of talk about a whole bunch of different things. And so I couldn't sort of see where would they go if I were to go to Article 4, which is, I think, the performance standards for resource areas. Like, I couldn't put it under aura because it's also talking about riverfront area. And, I couldn't talk about, resource area loss because it was also, would apply to every resource area. So that's why I thought general presumptions.
Mhm.
That was my thought about it.
Yeah, I like when it refers to climate change and things that maybe aren't necessarily discussed as much later in the document. I think it's just something we'll have to kind of look at a little bit and see if we want to include all of it, or. But I mean, it's all good. I guess it's all good information. It's just, I don't like to see sometimes when I feel like I see repetition in a document like this, it's just like, because then I feel like in the end, people aren't going to read the whole thing if it gets to be too long and too repetitious of
Yeah,
language.
you can forego it as long as you make sure that whatever you do have in Article 4 for resource area performance standards is not inconsistent with this language, because this is in the bylaw. So you have to do this. You have to follow this. You don't get a choice about that. So, again, you could just do it by reference, saying it's a general presumption, and then reference that section of the bylaw, which kind of spells out this analytical framework for how the commission's supposed to be making decisions and what they're supposed to take into account. Hold on one sec. Let me get rid of that. Okay. So go ahead.
Yep, no, that's all I have for that section.
All right.
Anybody have other things that they're
I'm inclined to agree with what you said, partly because when you get into the meat later, there seem to be things that were a little bit conflicting or confusing. So something was expressed one way here and then later slightly differently, which if you don't know what you're looking at, that makes it more difficult. But I also have a question. So we've got a lot of stuff up front, and that verbiage appears to be for the commission, and it may be for the average citizen to understand how the commission is making a decision. But I guess from my point of view, not knowing, how everybody else does stuff, if I'm picking up the regulations and I want to do something, my first thought is I go to the regulations, I look for what I want to do, I see what you tell me I have to do, how much it costs and what forms I have to fill out. And that's what I want to see up front. If I want more description about the details of some of this stuff, I could ask the commissioners. I could go, maybe have an appendix with this kind of material in it and get to that same stuff, or I could have a bibliography if I really want to study. But wading through the tens of pages of stuff here before I got to how to do what I want to do, I found pretty off-putting. And I'm wondering if that's an organization we have to stick with.
Well,
Do
No,
you
I
want me,
think-
do you want me to respond, Beth?
I'll just say that I do think the general structure of the document is kind of standard, and it mirrors the state regulations in terms of the sections and what order they're in, and a lot of the back end, again, where you actually get into the different resource areas, a lot of that is actually just straight out of the regulations and is set up the same way in the same order. Things like definitions, though, I've seen in all kinds of different towns will take a definitions for section, for example, and put that at the end. Like they put that almost as an appendix. So I guess there is some ways to start the document a little differently. But we can look at that.
Can I
Yes.
make a comment?
Yes.
And I see Scott had his hand raised.
Yep.
Did you want to go, Scott?
I'll defer to you and then I can go after you, Mary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, having a table of contents is helpful so people can see the overall layout of the regulations. But I would just advise the commission again that, as I mentioned earlier, regulations are really intended to function as rules and analytical tools for the commission to use. They're not written, neither these regulations or the state regulations, which are about 264 pages long and are very confusing and redundant and circular. Neither of those are intended to serve as instructions for an applicant to figure out what they need to do. The commission has to have clear instructions for applicants and guidance for applicants and a process for consulting with applicants and walking them through the process of applying. It's very complicated. Even if we didn't even have a bylaw and it was just the Wetlands Protection Act, permitting is complicated and people need help and support if they don't have professional consultants doing it for them. The commission has to do that and provide that guidance with, and I think the commission does have some instructions and some materials on its website and can continue to refine those, but that's really where applicants should be going. And then, the regulations, an applicant can read them, and they're absolutely allowed to do that, but I don't think they're written with that in mind to be in guidance for the applicant. It's not a how-to manual for the applicant. There has to be something else for applicants.
Just build on that and say, I do think that, reviewing these regs, it's really important to, I think to the degree that can provide clarity for the commission and making decisions and stepping down the bylaw is what's most important. I hear what you're saying, Janice. I don't think the regs document is a place where maybe people would be starting. And I do think that there's a need for some form of FAQs or a worksheet or something that takes, you know, the bylaw and the regs and translates it to something more simple for applicants to look at. Because I agree. I think most people who have a project, they really want to know what's allowed, what's not, what they have to do. And I think there are companion documents that we can do to step this down and make that easier for people.
Janice Stone?
Yes, I just wanted to say I agree with what Scott is saying, that there should be separate paperwork that serves as instructions on how to apply for different types of projects. And I think you guys have done some of that before, and that's the standard way that most people, and like I think Miriam was saying, the state wetland regulations, no applicant could go into and figure out how to do the application. It really, it's meant for the authority who's doing the implementation of the permitting to go through the weeds.
And some of it is inscrutable. I mean, there's some parts of it I've read a dozen times and I still, it's like, you know, because it's referencing other things, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's such a learning. I mean, I've been involved with wetland stuff now for 12, 13 years, and I still find new things in the state regs all the time. And I'm like, oh, okay, then. It's a constant learning. What else I wanted to. If people have questions, go ahead. I'm searching through my.
Well, we're still in this section. Is there anything,
I had no questions in that section.
All right.
you know, definitions, you know, it's always kind of like a balancing act of how many definitions to have, but I think, you know, definitions are really important, and certainly have a role in what makes something legally binding or not. Because if it's not defined, then if you don't define it in the regulations, then it becomes, you know, subject for controversy later, potentially. Whoop, did I just lose the screen share? No, we're still doing it.
No, you're there.
I've
So, and
lost
does this list of definitions, is the exact same list that's in the bylaw, or is this a expanded list of what's in the bylaw?
I took the list, and you know, you guys can see my document. I've lost it. Hold on one second.
No.
Okay, here it is, I guess. So I took the definitions that were in the regulations we passed in 2023. I added definitions that were new that are in the bylaw. And I also added some definitions for things that were not defined, but are in the bylaw. For example, I have to go back and look, you know, I don't remember if adaptation was in the bylaw or not. I think adaptation might have been in our regs. But there were, you know, so it tracks pretty closely with either the 2023 regs or the bylaw for the most part. And in a couple of instances, you know, I looked at subsets of other towns' regulations and looked at definitions that were commonly used. There was a definition that was used by multiple communities. I figured that's probably reflecting kind of a consensus in the field.
Mhm. Yep, as long as it's, yeah, consistent with what's in the bylaw. Um, that's all good. They have to be the same.
You can have more definitions, like you're not limited by the definitions that are in the bylaw. And in fact, that's one of the purposes of regulations, is to define terms that the bylaw doesn't define. So, you know, and I would say to the commission, if you think there's any terms that are relevant that are not in here, this would be an opportunity to add them.
Mhm. Okay. So I had no other questions about the definitions.
I didn't either.
How about the next section, which was, I'm gonna give you all my brain scrolling through here. Getting there. Okay, the next section is the general provisions. And there weren't many changes, really. There was the stormwater stuff. Do you want to take a look at that?
Yeah, I had a question in that.
Let me get there. Is this it? Okay, stormwater management. So again, the preambles are not standards per se. They're the background information the commission might use to help inform it and to put in findings.
Mhm.
So this sentence, this section are new.
Mhm.
Do you want me to read them?
That's the preamble part, I'm okay. At least I mean, I understand.
Okay. Then performance standards.
Yeah,
So the commission requires applicants to demonstrate that no significant change in off-site runoff from existing conditions will result from the proposed work, which by the way, is in the state regs. So that's being consistent with the Wetlands Protection. You can't shunt your stormwater off to somebody else. The post-project hydrologic budget must equal the pre-project hydrologic budget, and the commission may require the preparation of a budget to demonstrate that the one, it's a little wordy. It could probably be better written. Because it's sort of saying, I don't know if you want to use the preparation of an engineering report to demonstrate that the water budget is going to be maintained. I mean, is that what you want to use? I mean, that's what the hydrologic budget is basically an engineering analysis. And that would be at the discretion of the commission, whether to require it or not.
right. Yeah, I don't know. We may want to just change some of that language a little bit. I need to think about it a little bit more, how we want to refer
I almost think that
to the standards and stuff. But my real question was that 6.221, all auras shall be considered critical areas.
That's in the current regs.
That's in the state regs.
So it's in the current regs, the 2023 regs.
Yeah. Okay. I just need to look up what that, I just noticed it right now when we were going through, and I want to look up what the outcome of it that is. In terms of meeting the state standards.
Well, it wouldn't be under state standards because an aura is not a critical area under state standards. The buffer zone is not. There are certain things, and I have to go back and look. Maybe Janice, you remember what qualifies as a critical area?
Well, that's
Under-
why I'm wondering, the definition of a critical area and under the current DEP stormwater standards, if something is a critical area, what does it have to do? Because there's
Janet?
definitely ringing in my head that those are usually more specific areas than just the buffer zone, which is really the aura. So anyway, I thought maybe you or Janice can explain that.
I don't remember right now.
Okay, I'll look
Um,
at it. I can
let me-
look.
just looking, I'd have to go back and look, because
That's
I'm
okay.
just drawing a blank right this second. You know, my understanding is that it's not a critical area under state law, but because it's a resource area, and alteration of it is considered to be as important as alteration of other resource areas.
Mhm.
You know, alteration of other resource areas, I think, would be critical areas. So anyway, we can go back and look at that. But I think that a number of communities do this with their regulations. This wasn't an unusual piece.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, I was just trying, I flagged it when you were going through thinking critical area, like what do the stormwater standards require of critical areas? It just stood out, but okay, we'll look that up.
Maybe going back one higher there, Marion, to 6.21, what we were just talking about before. It seemed that the part that you had highlighted, I think that part makes sense to me. It's the following part that maybe is getting a little further down the weeds than what would be necessary. I don't know if you can scroll up a bit.
I'm sorry, what, Scott? Which part?
Can you scroll up a little bit? Yep, right there, it's 6.21.
Yeah.
Can you hear me
Um,
okay?
Yeah, I guess I thought there should be something about a statement of an expectation that there's no significant change. And it might be that that's enough, you know, like
I
maybe
thought
just,
that was, yeah, I thought the part you have highlighted there in the purple,
yeah,
I thought that was good. I think it starts to get into the alteration of cover types, that maybe that's,
oh,
that part, I don't know that it's, I mean, there are lots of things that could affect site runoff characteristics, you know,
Yeah.
including that, but I just didn't know if that, but sometimes by listing some and not listing others, I think some of that could be deleted.
yeah, I think I agree. I mean, I think that the issue about, I think there needs to be a statement that the commission has the discretion to require BMPs if it determines that they're necessary. So I think that's important, because that's also that the commission has that discretionary authority under the Wetlands Protection Act. So restating it is, I think, important. And I think this issue about direct runoff not being permitted into a resource area or off-site is also important, because those are performance standards.
Is there some overlap too, if you scroll down to the next piece where we talk about 6.222, loss of pervious surfaces, where again, talking about infiltration and presumably runoff, are those sections perhaps connected in some way?
Because they're saying the same thing.
Right? That's how I read it.
It's hard to gonna get rid of this comment because when I change things. Yep.
So I was thinking maybe those two sections could be combined and maybe make it a little less redundant and and get to the piece I think you're looking to add, which is, you know, that we have to follow the state Wetland Protection Act, and that BMPs may be required if we're going to be changing the amount of runoff.
Yeah. Agreed. And then this piece about a waiver, you know, I think that's important. I don't think you want to let that go. I'm happy to tweak this a little bit and bring it back to you guys. This is good feedback.
Again, I'm just really impressed with all the work that's gone into drafting this. So thank you. These are minor tweaks. I'm really very impressed with all the work that you and Janice have done bringing this forward. So I want to say thank you.
Mhm.
I didn't have any more in this part. I don't know, Beth or Janice, if you did.
Did Bob ever join us? Bob, are you out there? No, I don't think he did. I'm looking.
Oh, no, I'm here.
Oh, good. Hi, Bob.
Hey there.
If you have any comments, questions, raise your hand.
I absolutely will.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't have anything else really until the docks and piers section.
Okay. Let me get down there. And again, I just, you know, I took a stab at it, trying to think a little bit about what the commission's policies have been. And what some of the parameters are with state standards. And just for reference, I don't know if you guys can see my comments here, but you know, Westport, Kingston, Hingham all have sections for docks and piers in their bylaw regulations. And there are more towns. I just was the ones I looked at. And one of the reasons why I was looking at those in particular are Hingham's and Kingston's is because, as you'll see, their regulations are very recent. And they did a very thorough job with their regulations. And those towns have great ponds. And so they had regulations for great ponds. I know those are coastal towns, but the regulations were because they also have great ponds.
Mhm.
So how would you want to attack this, Beth? Want to just read through it together?
Yeah, because there was some, sorry, there was something that when we were going through it before. Yeah, if you want to just,
Okay,
Yeah.
preamble.
Fine.
So applicants seeking to install docks are encouraged to familiarize themselves with DP. That's kind of not necessary. That's just really, I mean, that would be like, you know, you might want to put that in some handout for applicants. So it's not really essential that you have that statement. The construction, existence, maintenance, use and repair of water dependent structures, which again is defined under what a water dependent structure is, over time is likely to have significant and cumulative adverse effects on the values. Individual or multiple structures in close proximity to each other have the potential to degrade resource areas by altering water quality, water circulation, bottom sediments, banks, land under water bodies, aquatic animals and vegetation, fisheries, wildlife, rare species. Docks, piers, walkways, and floats have the effect of segmenting wetlands and may inhibit their functions. Increased erosion, scouring, and undercutting of banks may also occur in their vicinity. Docks can cause shading. Boating activity associated with docks can result in turbulence through prop dredging and wakes, adding suspended sediment to the water column, thereby degrading water quality, smothering vegetation, blah, blah, blah. Boat traffic generated from docks can cause erosion of banks and BBWs. So this language, I know, seems a little maybe not apropos to, you know, what the purview of the commission is, but it's in a lot of other regulations. Lake Wyola is a great pond designated by Chapter 91 And chapter 91 licensing requires an order of conditions or determination by the commission before a license can be issued. So that's seems worthwhile to make note of that. In recent years and from time to time, Lake Wyola and portions of its watershed have been designated and mapped as priority habitat by natural heritage. Projects in or near priority habitat must be reviewed by natural heritage, independent of the commission's jurisdiction. But I feel like there's something projects, but I think it means are significant to the values of the bylaw. Before granting any order, permit, or other determination, the commission shall require proof of natural heritage review as required by state law, because that if for some reason it lost the Lake Wyola lost its ESP designation, then it wouldn't be required. So that's another reason around the order of conditions. When you do an NOI, the application, the State Wetlands Protection Act Form 3 gives the applicant instructions about notifying natural heritage. Natural heritage is clarified that even if it's an RDA, if it's a dock in Lake Wyola, you still have to notify them. But the state RDA form doesn't tell them to do that. And that is, I think, kind of creates this ambiguity and potential for confusion. If the commission required a notice of intent for docks, then the applicants would see those instructions on the form. But if they're allowed to apply for the dock through an RDA process, then the commission would have to make sure it tells the applicant in advance that they need to go through the natural heritage review process, and that could jam them up.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I understand all of that, and that's how it goes. But I think this is one thing that I saw earlier. Not priority habitat and estimated habitat is reviewed and changed by the state on kind of a regular basis. And so, there may be other areas within town besides the Lake Wyola area that get mapped for natural heritage. And having this in the regulations it makes me a little nervous because of the fact that the Lake Wyola designation might change over time. It may not be listed anymore. I feel like
that's why I put in recent years and from time to time, because making it clear that that could change. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe they said more explicitly, again, just kind of spelling out this.
I feel like that section would belong better in somewhere where we're simply talking about natural heritage, not talking about docks and piers, I guess.
Well, except that I suppose you have to do a review if you're doing work in priority in Pri-Hab, you have to go through the review process. Even if it was, and there are a couple of other little areas where there's Pri-Hab in Shutesbury.
Right.
It just seems like in terms of a permitting standpoint, the two other areas that I'm aware of, like right now, there's no development. It's just forest habitat. So it's really Lake Wyola is where this becomes kind of a development issue.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel a little strange about having that in the regulations.
What about if it were to say, if a dock application is subject to natural heritage, jurisdiction, the commission will require proof of the review. I mean, we have to anyway. I mean, you have to, not we, you have to, but somehow I think making it clear in the regulations and in your instructions to applicants seems really important.
Yeah, it just stands out to me that that can be anywhere in town where there's natural heritage, not necessarily just where the docks and piers are being put in, you know? So having it be in this section just seems just kind of odd. I don't know. We can look at it. I just wanted to point that out, I guess, and
Oh, okay.
see what other people think. Scott, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I had the same thought, and I was also just looking at the previous sections up until 10.1.6 and wondering, I mean, I think they're kind of reiterating kind of the science of how some of those structures could impact resource areas, but I didn't really see them as regulation in and of themselves. You know, in
No,
terms of-
they're preambles. It's more just general information relevant to the decision making that the commission and sort of facts that the commission might rely on in making a permitting decision. These aren't performance standards. These are just sort of background ancillary information that might inform a decision.
So all the 10.1s are the preamble to help kind of frame the commission in terms of what the potential impacts would be.
That's the structure that's been followed throughout the regs. So again, this is a decision point about requiring an order of conditions. Well, wait. So here, 10.17, the commission encourages landowners to obtain Chapter 91 licenses for pre-existing docks. So that's a policy that the commission has taken. It's not a performance standard. Whether you want to put that in the regulations just to kind of underline that or not is up to the commission to decide.
Right now, you have that in the preamble.
Yes. Because it's not being it's not a, so then there's, why don't we move down so we can see how this all interrelates. So then we've got this definition, navigation. Here are the presumptions. Where proposed activity involves a water-dependent use or the construction or use of a water-dependent structure, such as a dock, permanent or seasonal, pier or float, the commission shall presume that such activities or structures are significant to the values. This presumption is rebuttable and may be overcome by preponderance of evidence showing that the activity or structure does not play a role in the protection of said values. If the presumption is deemed to have been overcome, the commission shall make a written determination to this effect, setting forth its grounds. That's a pretty standard pattern for presumptions. And then here are the performance standards. So the commission shall only review a proposed dock, pier, or other water-dependent structure that is not a float or swimming platform upon the submission of an NOI. So that's the decision point. Are you going to require that or not? I put that in, that you could decide to change that. Such application shall include proof of application submission for NEHSP approval. Again, you might want to take that out because the PRIHAB may not be there. The PRIHAB mapping is subject to change over time. And proof of having initiated a Chapter 91 license. Again, you don't necessarily, that could also be not necessary because you could put that in your order of conditions. So you could say to somebody, all right, you're going to have to come back to us for a certificate of compliance and show us that you got the Chapter 91 license. They can't get the license until they have the order of conditions. So, they can initiate the application, but they can't complete the application until they have. So it could just be that you put in your order of conditions that, as the commission has done in the past, saying that it won't issue a certificate of compliance until it has proof, either that the license is duly recorded at the registry or that the dock is no longer in use. And no order shall be issued until a minimum of 30 days if it's elapsed from submission to NEHP. That again, that's state law, you know, putting it in there is really kind of stating a policy decision because you're required to wait 30 days anyway. But you know, here's the kind of rub about an RDA. With an RDA, you're supposed to open your public hearing in 21 days from the filing of an RDA, but that isn't enough time for Natural Heritage to do its review. So you'd have to open the hearing and then you'd have to continue it to a date after 30 days.
Yeah. Bob, you have your hand up? Oh, I think you froze. Uh-oh,
You there, Bob?
I think you froze, Bob.
He'll come back.
He'll come back.
So, so you know, the NHP stuff you could take out, you know, because, you know, again, it's referencing something that is more subject to change over time. I'm just gonna highlight that so I can find it again. And that's, again, you've got to decide, you know, are you gonna require an NOI or are you gonna allow some of these to come through on an RDA? And if you do an RDA, then you have to be really clear that there has to be this 30-day review period with Natural Heritage. And then, you know, how are you gonna ensure compliance if if one of the conditions is that people have to get the license? Because you don't want to permit a project, you don't want to be permitting a dock that then isn't in compliance with state law. I mean, I remember having a conversation with Mark Stinson about this, that one of the conditions of an RDA is that when you apply for an RDA, you have to certify in your application that you're going to be in compliance with all state laws. So you have to get the Chapter 91 license if it's for a dock because state law requires that. But how would the commission review compliance with the permit if it has no mechanism for coming back to the applicant?
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. I mean, in the end, you would be in resource area most likely, especially if you're putting in a new dock, because you're going to be affecting bank and land underwater with the actual structure often. And if you're in a resource area, you should be filing a notice of intent. So,
All right, so let's move on. So the commission, so this is a decision point, but I was proposing that the commission propose that seasonal floats, buoys, and swimming platforms, which get removed, could be reviewed perhaps under a small project permit. Because you know, they're only in place for a year or for a season.
I'd have to, maybe when we get to the small project permit application, we can go back, and I'm just trying to remember if we really talk about those types of things there. But,
I think we had an exclusion for docks. I have to go back and look. I knew that we excluded docks from it. You couldn't do it for a dock, but I'm not sure I mentioned floats and buoys, and that's why I was thinking, you know, maybe you know, to make it a little easier for people who are wanting to put up things like this. So that's something to think about. I'm just gonna that red. All right, if the commission receives an application for any proposed activity on a property with an existing but unlicensed dock, pier, walkway, or float, a condition of the order of conditions shall require the Chapter 91 license be obtained. Certificates of compliance shall not be granted until proof of a duly recorded license is provided to the commission. So that has been the practice of the commission.
Yeah.
And then while each application shall be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, the commission shall also consider cumulative adverse impacts on wetland values caused by the installation of multiple docks, piers, or floats within the same resource area or adjacent resource areas. Application for docks, piers, walkways shall comply to the greatest extent practicable with the applicable design standards from the DEP, small docks and piers, or as it may be amended, as well as all local, state, and federal regulations pertaining to the installation of such structures. So that's another performance standard. Docks, piers, floats shall not degrade resource areas during construction or for the life of the structure. Design and construction of such structures shall use best available measures to minimize impact. Siting shall avoid or minimize placement over vegetation. And then structural maintenance of docks, piers, or walkways, or any portion thereof, shall require the owner to inquire of the commission as to whether the work will require a new permit. Maintenance of a wooden structure shall not include hazardous materials. And that's something to think about because, there are, I know of one instance where the commission permitted a wooden permanent dock. It wasn't a removal seasonal dock. And so there's the question about maintenance for structures like that. Notwithstanding the provisions listed above, no project may be permitted which will have any adverse effect on rare species habitat. And maybe that's enough to say that and get rid of all the natural heritage stuff up above.
Yeah.
And storage of materials stored in an area outside of a resource area except for the aura or riverfront and must be transported there too without causing damage. So obviously people might need to store their docks in an aura because that's their whole property is in the aura.
Yeah.
But I remember there was a project we reviewed a year ago or so where somebody was storing their dock in a BVW. So that's that.
Okay. How are people feeling? Do we need to stop at any point? And maybe
I'm not used to this. I'm out of practice at these marathon sessions.
because we have another meeting tomorrow night. We have a regular meeting tomorrow night. I don't know, how do people feel?
Well, I could stop anytime.
I'm thinking, my thought would be that I think again, thank you so much, Miriam and Janice, for doing all this work. And I feel like we have raised a few questions and things that maybe you can make a couple tweaks or whatnot, and then get us the sort of the latest version of. And then, I mean, in a way, I feel like at that point, then as a commission, we need to start just going through the different sections, kind of finalizing it how we want it finalized, and then eventually bringing it to a public hearing at one of our meetings. Carrie?
I was gonna ask if Miriam could send the presentation, the PowerPoint slide she shared in the beginning, just so that when I reference it for the minutes, I can have it attached as well.
I know when we were going through the draft, there were a couple places where I went, oops, there's a typo or something got cut off. I don't know if anybody was taking notes of when those were, because I'm gonna have to go listen to the recording to figure it out. Did anybody take notes?
Not on that.
Yeah.
I
No.
think Carrie was just referring to the PowerPoint, the 6 or 7 slides. With
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know
nice,
that.
okay, a nice
No,
reference.
No, it was when we were going through the draft. There
Yeah.
were a couple places where all of a sudden it looked like there was a sentence missing, and I'll have to go hunt for it. It's okay.
You outlined that one in red, but you did a couple other very minor corrections to spelling or something on the
Okay.
fly.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for taking all this time with us.
Oh, thank you for all your work on this. I mean, that was huge. Just bringing the regulations up to matching what's in the bylaw. I mean, that was something that had to be done, and it's really wonderful that the two of you were able to do it. So thank you very much. And so, yeah, I think that'll be the way forward. If you make, any changes from this meeting and then get us the most recent version, then we will take it from there. But thank you very much. Does anybody have
Okay.
any other things to talk about?
Just to reiterate the thanks to Miriam and to Janice for all the work on this. It was a ton of work going through this and reading it, and a lot of careful thought. And so I'm just very appreciative. Thank you.
Me too.
Worries.
Welcome. It's mostly Miriam, as you can guess. But I read it all over a few times. So,
I'm sure you did. Yep. Thank you to
yeah.
both of you.
Thank you guys for being interested and willing to take another evening of your week and time before that, reading it to deal with this.
We will keep on working on it till we get our wonderful final regulations.
All right. I'll take a stab at it and get you a draft, and I'm going to sign off. So good night.
Okay.
Night.
Great.
Night.
Good night. Thank you, Miriam.
Thanks, Miriam.
Good night.
All right, night, Janice. All right, so we'll see the rest of you guys tomorrow night. All right, motion to adjourn.
I so move.
I'll second it.
All right, Rowan,
Aye.
Con,
Aye.
Douglas,
Hi.
and Wilson. Aye. All right, thanks, everyone.
Have a good
Great.
night.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Good night.